Hello, I'm Benjamin Fry, and today we're going to be talking about mental health symptoms and whether or not it's possible that many of these are in fact us just doing the right thing but at the wrong time. So imagine you're walking down the street and you see somebody running towards you and they're wild. They are looking around wildly, they're screaming, maybe they're barefoot, maybe their clothes are ripped. What do you think of this person? Now, a lot of people, when I ask them that question, they'll say, well, he seems crazy, he seems mad, he seems scary even. And if I ask, would you cross the road to avoid them? They'll say, yes, this is a threatening situation. And then I ask, what if you now see, coming around the corner behind the man, charging after him, a fully grown adult lion? Now what do you think of the man? And people will respond, well, he seems more normal. He seems naturally frightened of being chased by the lion. And I ask, if you were able to, like if you maybe had a gun and if you knew how to use it, would you help this man? And the answer is yes, of course I'd help him. So the interesting point about that story is that the man is exactly the same. He's identical in both stories, but in the first story, he's crazy and I'm afraid of him, I don't want to help him. And in the second story, he's normal and I'll help him if I can. This should tell us a lot about this thing that we call mental health, because craziness or poor mental health or a lack of sanity does appear to be related to your context. It's perfectly normal to be anxious if you're being chased by a lion. It's perfectly normal to be really shut down, maybe you might call it depressed, if you've been caught by a lion and you're totally overwhelmed. But if we can't see the lion, then we look like there's something wrong with us. So it does raise the idea that maybe a lot of what we need to understand about in our lives and in our biochemistry and in our bodies and in our minds isn't in fact something mysterious called mental illness, but it's something related to context. It is in fact the invisible lion. So looking at this more deeply, we have to try to think about where is the lion and why are we reacting to it the way we are that doesn't seem to be obvious. The lion is in fact an event that has happened earlier in our life that we haven't finished reacting to, we haven't finished responding to. So let's say, for example, you're in a car crash. You might find that you wake up in the middle of the night for the next 2 to 3 months, maybe having flashbacks, maybe hyperventilating, maybe sweating, maybe anxious, or that you're shut down, overwhelmed during the day. And the thought of going into a car can sometimes trigger these kind of flashbacks. And what most people find is that after a while, these experiences dissolve, they discharge from the body, and then we feel normal again. And then we can go in a car, and we can sleep normally, we can talk about the car crash without it being as if we are there in that moment. We still remember it, we can still tell the story, but it's not like we're reliving it over and over again. When we spend our lives running from an invisible lion, we are in fact still there. It's still happening. The lion is still chasing us down the street because the body has not yet finished doing what the body needs to do in response to a threat. And this is the significant problem. So there's a different way of looking at all of the things that we consider to be mental health problems, which is what we might call a neurobiologically informed or an anatomically informed way of looking at it, which tells us that rather than the brain driving the problem, the brain is just the final domino to fall in a long chain of problems that begins with the body having not finished responding to something that we thought was threatening in the first place. The reason why this is useful is because we can move on from classical concepts of psychiatry and psychology onto an explanation of the things that we call mental health problems that's logical. You see, psychiatry and psychology at the moment tend to just observe problems and then classify them and then give them important sounding names, often with capital letters, but it doesn't actually tell us anything. So if I go to the doctor and I say, I'm generally very anxious, and he tells me you have generalized anxiety disorder, it doesn't really tell me anything. But if you come to me and you say, I'm generally very anxious, and I say, well, maybe you haven't finished running away from a lion that was chasing you once, then at least we have the opportunity to do two things. First of all, we can go looking for the lion. Secondly, we can actually help the body to finish its escape from that lion. And this is where the hopeful message is that if we take on board this idea that there's a causal, logical relationship between things that have happened to us in our lives, or more accurately, things that have happened around our bodies in our lives, and what we now call mental health symptoms, then we can begin to have a logical idea about how to fix it. A lot of the problem with mental health treatment is that it doesn't seem to be very clear what it is we should do, and it doesn't seem to be very clear what works. But if the idea is that the body has not finished responding to an earlier threat, then we can help the body to finish responding to an earlier threat. So the first step along that path is to actually begin to become in relationship with our bodies again. We've spent hundreds, if not thousands of years as a society and as a culture removing ourselves from our bodies and getting into our heads and into our brains. There's some very simple exercises to get back in the body, and you'll be aware that many of them have become very popular these days. For example, mindfulness, meditation, yoga, tai chi. These are all the ancient paths of getting back into the body and healing ourselves that have now become so popular and even are beginning to be prescribed by doctors and GPs. If you want to do an exercise yourself, just to get going on this method, there's a very simple one called the body scan. You can see an example of that on the resource page of the Invisible Lion website, and it's a very simple process. You follow a guided meditation just to become aware of the sensations in your body. This is step one to returning to the body and returning to the place where we can actually begin to finish our unfinished reactions to earlier threats. If you can do that, then you can begin to put the invisible lions back to sleep. And that should solve an awful lot of problems, which today we think of as being mental health and emotional health and behavioral health difficulties. Thank you for listening. This was Benjamin Fry talking to you about some of the material from my recent book, The Invisible Lion, which I wrote because of countless consultations and lectures and workshops with people trying to explain how to make life, themselves and their nervous systems more easily understood. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more, please go to theinvisiblelion.com. You can find details on the book and further resources to help you explore these concepts.